speak here today for the last lecture. This May, I will be retiring after 41 years at Rockford College/University, or as I say, Rockford Collversity. You see, for more than 3/4 of my time here, it was Rockford College. So to only refer to it as Rockford University would leave a huge hole in my story. So I thought best to merge the two, hence Rockford Collversity. I've entitled my remarks, What Stuck? Memories from the last 41 years. When I was asked to do this, I started thinking about what I was going to say. What would be significant enough to talk about? And as I was reflecting over that amount of time, I recall some things were extremely vivid, others were foggy. There were some times I didn't recall anything important at all. We've all had the experience where someone, frequently our parents, asks us if we remember something that they recall in vivid detail, but we don't remember at all. So, what makes something stick for one person and not the other? Obviously, that event had to be significant for the person that remembers it so vividly. So, I thought, what stuck for me in those 41 years? I realized the majority of the things that stuck were centered around two things: travel and the theater. For those of you that know me, that probably doesn't come as a surprise, since for the most part of those 41 years, I was either working on a show or off on some foreign adventure. But before I start my speech, I would like to put those 41 years into context for you. I came to Rockford College, which was its name at that time, in August of 1982. Ronald Reagan was president. There were no cell phones, personal computers, or the internet. It was 19 years before 9/11, so when someone arrived, you could still go to meet them at their gate. Monica Lewinsky was 9 years old, and the term social media would have meant absolutely nothing. In short, it was a completely different world. So, where to start? Let's say travel. When I graduated from high school, I went on what would now be called a foreign study experience. It was a 4-week tour of Europe with other graduating seniors from local high schools. We went to Spain, Italy, France, England. I was hooked. To see the world from a completely different perspective was fascinating. Wow, not everyone lived the same way I did. There was one experience during that trip that was so unlikely and bizarre that I have to mention it. While I was in Spain, I went bullfighting. No, I didn't say I attended a bullfight. I fought a bull. Oh no. Do I not have hope? And yes, it's a baby bull, but it was still a bull, and it was running towards me. And all I had was a cape. I cannot imagine anyone being allowed to do that today. I mean, lawyers would be lining up at the entrance. There was one event that changed my life forever. That was when the college asked me to go to London to run our foreign study program at Regent's College. I arrived in London in January of 1989. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. There are so many things that stuck from my time in London that it's really hard to narrow it down. For those of you that heard my talk at the December recognition ceremony, some of these next parts will sound familiar. While I was in London, I met Nick Caldwell, someone who is a very close friend to this day. He does business in New York, has an apartment there, and knows the American way of life very well. One time, we were talking about the differences between how Americans and Europeans view the idea of going on vacation, or holiday, as he would say. He said, Americans live to work. Europeans work to live. It hit me that Europeans saw travel as an essential part of their lives, not a luxury as we do. I realized that the experience of travel is always yours to keep. You can carry those experiences with you. No matter what you might lose, you can lose everything you own, but you will still have those experiences. So I traveled as much as possible while I could while I was there. Not to the usual places, but to destinations that were harder to get to from the US. All right, side note. One time when I was in a travel agency, I started looking at the travel brochures. And out of curiosity, I looked at the ones for the Caribbean to see what hot destinations the Europeans were going to. I was stunned to see big, splashy ads for vacations to, wait for it, Cuba. Cuba? They had to be kidding. Nick said, what's the matter? I told him that as Americans, we're not allowed to go to Cuba. He replied, what do you mean not allowed? He thought I was joking. He could not believe that the government would prevent us from going somewhere. What was a fact of life for me was totally outrageous to him. This was one of the many times that I realized that our perspectives of the same thing can be totally different. One of the first things to stay was on my first trip to Greece. I went to the island of Mykonos, which truly is a beautiful place. One night, we were sitting outside enjoying ourselves, and this group of middle-aged, most likely retired American tourists came walking by. One of the women said, oh, isn't Italy just beautiful? And I'm thinking, Greece. You're in Greece. They had been to so many places, they had no idea where they actually were. It was just another foreign country. Right then and there, I said I would not be that person. I wouldn't wait until I was retired to travel. I told myself I would never go any place for less than 1 week. The idea of 7 cities in 7 days is just not for me. I like to explore a city and wander around and see what I might find. Sorry. For example, when I was in Istanbul, I set out to find some place to get dinner. I went to the restaurant area, but all of the places clearly catered to just tourists with belly dancers, fake dervishes, and the like. So I kept walking. I suddenly found myself on the coastline, looking across the water to the Asian side. I found a wonderful little restaurant. I was seated, and the waiter gave me a menu in German. I was usually mistaken for German. I said I was American and asked if they had an English menu. The waiter was stunned. He said they rarely got Americans there. I got a free bottle of wine and was treated like a VIP the entire evening. Sitting by myself at night, sipping wine, looking over the Bosphorus at the twinkling lights of Asia, priceless. However, now, looking back at some of those explorations, don't know if I'd be quite as adventurous now. But I'm so glad I did it when I was younger. This leads me to my trip to Moscow. I always wanted to go to Moscow, see the Bolshoi, St. Basil's Cathedral, the Kremlin. It was only a 3-hour flight from London, so I thought, will I ever get this chance again? So I decided to go. I went during winter to have that full Russian experience. Now, it was still the USSR. Gorbachev was president, Boris Yeltsin was running to be the mayor of Moscow. Of course, I had to get a visa, and it was stapled to one of the pages in my passport. Like everywhere else, when I entered, it was stamped. But when I left, rather than stamping it again, it was removed. There was no evidence in my passport that I had ever been there. That was just a little creepy. While I was going there, on the plane, I started a conversation with another man in my row. He was actually a ballet teacher from England and had been to Moscow several times. He said that the first thing I had to do that night was to go to Red Square. Since we were getting there later in the day, it would be dark. The experience of seeing it for the first time at night was amazing. Well, we got to the hotel, I quickly unpacked it, looked at my subway map, and realized that there was a subway stop right across from the hotel that would take me right to Red Square. By the way, Moscow has an unbelievably good subway system, but more about that later. So, off I went to see Red Square. I took the subway, got up at the stop, and started walking toward the square. It was totally dark by day, and you have to walk up a little hill from the subway stop. As I was walking, I slowly started to see the illuminated spires of St. Basil's Cathedral appear, then the golden domes of the Kremlin Palace, and finally the great expanse of Red Square. The ballet teacher was right. It was as if all of it were rising up out of the ground, right in front of me. It was a moment I will never forget. When you see someone in Moscow, when they're reporting, it seems that they're always standing in the same place, with St. Basil's over their left shoulder. So, of course, I had to get that picture. Since there was no other way to actually prove I was there, I needed photographic evidence. Jeff Hendry, reporting from Moscow. One of the things I had to do while I was in Moscow, I wanted to see the Bolshoi Ballet perform. So off I went to get a ticket. And after I did that, I walked to the square across from the theater to get a good picture. As I was walking around looking for just the right angle, a very large policeman started coming towards me. Big great coat, fur shako, and a Kalashnikov machine gun over his shoulder. Panic set in. I thought, okay, I should be able to take a picture here. It's not a military or government building. So why is this guy walking towards me? I briefly thought, do I just quietly walk away? But he was getting too close for that to work. So I just stood there, fiddling with my camera. When he came up to me, he looked at me, pointed to the theater, and said, "Bolshoi is beautiful, no?" I was totally caught off guard. I stupidly said, "Yes." Then he motioned as if to ask me if I wanted him to take my picture, and smiled. I responded, no thank you. I was too flummoxed to know what was actually going on. He smiled, turned around, and walked away. I will always regret not letting him take that picture. The Bolshoi. No me. There were two encounters I had in the Moscow subways that really illustrate how different perceptions can be. The first happened as I was waiting for a subway to arrive at one of the platforms. Now, if you're picturing a typical subway in New York, Chicago, or even London, put that completely out of your mind. The subways in Moscow are immaculate, with beautiful tiled walls and chandeliers. So, as I was waiting on the platform, there was a group of about 8 to 10 guys in their 20s, and one of them came up to me and said, "American?" Oh, crap, I thought. said yes, and he asked me, why do you want to make war on us? It was like being hit physically. The answer was so complex. What do I say? Most Americans don't. Some people in our government do. You say it's the other way around. How could I possibly explain to him in a way that he would understand? So, I simply said, the people don't. Moscow is a beautiful city. We shook hands, and the train arrived. The other experience I shared in December, but I would like to repeat it for those of you that didn't hear it then. One day I was returning to my hotel, and it was snowing. And as I was leaving the subway, I saw a man buying a bouquet of flowers from a stand just outside of the station. It was a small bouquet, and the flowers were starting to wilt. It would have been thrown away if it had been on sale here. But this man looked at it as if it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And I could tell that it made him so happy. I imagined he was planning to take it home to his wife or mother. But then I suddenly felt extremely ashamed. I knew I'd have thrown it out too, seen it as less than perfect. I realized how much I took for granted, how fortunate I actually was. There I was, from Rockford, Illinois, living in London and visiting Moscow. This man would probably never leave Moscow, let alone the Soviet Union. And he was thrilled by a small bouquet of wilted flowers. To this day, I have no idea why I noticed this particular man. But it's been 34 years since I saw him, and I can still see the look of joy on his face. On the day I departed Moscow, I left the hotel, went to the airport, had the visa removed from my passport, and returned to London a totally different person. I returned to the U.S. in Rockford College in July of 1990. I saw the world and my place in it completely different. I didn't see things as black and white anymore. I became more skeptical of the accepted versions of things. Now, I was completely safe back in my own country. There's one thing I have to share at this point. While I was in London, I'd been introduced to food items that were impossible to get when I returned to the U.S. So, what were these rare and exotic items, you might ask? Greek yogurt and Pinot Grigio. Yep, they were nowhere to be found. I had to go to one specific grocery store in Greektown in Chicago for the yogurt, and a specialty wine store for the Pinot. I cannot believe that Greek yogurt is an entire aisle of almost every grocery store today, and Pinot Grigio is as prevalent as Chardonnay. But the world has really shrunk in the last 30 years. Online shopping has made it possible to get just about anything you could possibly want. There's a part of me that misses the days when things were special, because you couldn't get them everywhere. I remember the first couple of trips back to Mykonos, and how amazing the yogurt tasted at breakfast, not after having had it for 2 to 3 years. Now, it's just yogurt. In the summer of 1997, my husband John and I went to India. I'd often wanted to see the Taj Mahal and other major architecture. I've subsequently realized I'm drawn to places with significant buildings. The temples of Bali in Thailand, the Sagrada Familia and other Gaudi buildings in Barcelona. Back to India. I knew there would be culture shock. I realized the poverty was extreme, but I thought, I can handle that. Boy, was I wrong. There is nothing that can prepare you for the overwhelming poverty of India. In my subsequent travels, there has been nothing comparable. I'll start with our arrival in Delhi. We got there around 5 o'clock in the evening, so by the time we got our luggage, it was getting dark. All of the guidebooks recommended that you book your taxi to the hotel from one of the kiosks inside of the terminal. So that's what I did. The attendant said our driver would be there shortly. Wanting to get a glimpse of Delhi, I walked to the windows, but they were painted over so you couldn't see outside. So we sat and waited. Shortly, our driver showed up. He took some of our baggage, told us to get the rest, and said, "Take my hand and don't let go." Odd, I thought. We walked towards the door, and as it opened, you could see what can only be described as a sea of humanity. I realized why the windows had been painted out. There were hundreds of people, all yelling and grabbing, asking if we needed help, a porter, a ride, total chaos. I held tight to both John and the driver as he pushed our way through the crowd, sometimes having to hit people to get them out of our way. We got to the taxi and got inside. People were still swarming around the car. We pulled away, and I was finally able to relax. It was dark now, and it was hazy or smoggy. And as we were driving along what could loosely be called an expressway, we saw figures coming out of the dark from the median. It looked like a scene from The Walking Dead. At some point, the haze lifted, and we could see that there were huts and tents in the middle of the expressway. And we realized people were actually living there. I had not prepared myself for this. The next day, I thought we should go to the train station to book tickets to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. I've always booked my own tickets. So I looked in the guidebook to see if there was a specific place I needed to go, and indeed, foreigners had to take their passport and go to a specific office. We took a taxi to the train station. Not surprisingly, total chaos. But I found the office. However, there was no one there other than locals. Absolutely nothing explaining what I needed to do to get a ticket. But now I thought, well, we decided to return to the hotel and see if we could get some help there. In an attempt to try and salvage part of the day, I had read about a shop that sold good quality Indian handcrafted artwork. I suggested we stop there on our way back to the hotel. We hailed a taxi, gave the driver the address, and set off to the store. As we drove through town, when we stopped at a light, swarms of rabid children would run up to the car and start begging in German. When there was no response, they switched to Dutch, Italian, French. They had learned to beg in multiple languages. This was a necessary survival skill for them. On the street, there were amputees with bowls placed in front of them, hoping someone would leave some coins. The signs of unbelievable poverty were everywhere. And this was in the better part of the city. I could only guess what it was like in the slums. A few minutes into our ride, the taxi driver told us that he would take us to a relative's shop first. We found out that this was very common. We told him we didn't want to do that, but he insisted. When we said no again, he pulled over and screamed at us to get out of his cab. I thought, really, is this a joke? But he kept screaming, so we got out. There we were, our first full day in Delhi, standing by the side of the road in the middle of the city with absolutely no idea where we were. With a bit of trepidation, we hailed another cab, and he actually took us where we wanted to go. The shop was great. We actually bought 2 large wooden carvings that we had shipped back and one of the mirrored tapestries, both of which are still in our house to this day. When we finally got back to the hotel, we discussed whether or not we should just leave India and go to Thailand, which was the second part of our trip. This was a serious consideration, but I said, we came halfway around the world. We should at least try and see the Taj Mahal. So, bless his heart, John went down to the front desk to see if he could find anything out about traveling to Agra. About 20 minutes later, he came back. Problem solved, he said. When he spoke to the concierge and told him what had happened, the concierge said, "Oh, no, we will provide you with a driver." John asked, "Well, how much would it cost?" He was told $25 for an entire day. Neither of us could believe it. So, the next day, we met with the driver, and he asked us where we wanted to go. We gave him a list, and he organized each day based on the proximity of our destinations. This driver literally saved our trip. He was amazing. He became our personal chauffeur. He took us wherever we wanted to go, found places for us to eat lunch known only to the locals. Had it not been for him, we would probably have gone to Thailand. One day had been set aside for a trip to see the Taj Mahal and Fatehpur Sikri. Fatehpur Sikri is a fully preserved town which was abandoned in 1610, about 20 miles from Agra. We had an amazing day. It was everything that you could imagine it would be, all because of our driver. This man gave us an insight into his country that we would never have had without him. We paid the hotel $25 a day. I wondered how much of that he actually got. At the end of our stay, we gave him our thanks, along with a very large tip. It was truly fascinating. Some of these images are etched in my mind forever. As we went into the different shops, the salespeople were incredibly aggressive. One actually followed us for blocks until we finally had to say, "Leave us the F alone." And he just turned around and walked away. Now, this may sound harsh, but unfortunately, what we realized was they expected our response to be docile and polite because we didn't want to be perceived as ugly Americans. We also found out that whenever you spoke up for yourself and you showed signs of strength, they would instantly back down. It felt like some odd Darwinian form of showing dominance. And it didn't only happen with foreigners. It occurred during interactions with themselves. Any personal interaction seemed to be approached as if it were a battle to be won. Someone had to be the victor. It was exhausting. One last tip. We were laying by the pool one afternoon. It was very hot. The pool attendant motioned to the palm trees and said, "Look, eagles." We looked. They were eagles. They were vultures. Probably sitting there waiting for some poor tourist to expire from the heat. "Hey, look, dinner!" In India, it really was survival of the fittest. So, why these stories? Well, as the title of my speech says, they stuck. But I asked myself why. I think mostly because they made me look at my life from a completely different angle. We don't always see ourselves as others see us. So many things we think are normal or necessary are completely beyond the reach of others. Could I have come to this realization looking at our own country? Of course. But being in a foreign country, we tend to see our surroundings more. We actually notice what is different. And many times, these differences put our own lives in a clearer perspective. So, theater. I really don't know where to start. I guess I should probably start with a misconception about what I do. Someone gave this to me, and it could not be more spot on. I love the last one. What I actually do with this poor old woman sewing away and someone going, sew, sew. Everyone tells me that being a costume designer must be so glamorous. Well, ask John what I'm like after working on a show for 3 or 4 weeks straight, and I don't think glamorous is the word he uses. I liken my job to being shot out of a cannon. You're working like that, going, show up and stuff. So, the upcoming production of You're in Town will be the 294th production I have designed, and the 169th at Rockford University. All right, stories. One of my first paying jobs was a production of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. It was right after I graduated with my BFA from the University of Arizona. The show was being done by a local Shakespeare company and was directed by a former professor of mine. His wife was playing the role of Cleopatra. I'd worked with her before, so we were acquainted, and I knew she was a little eccentric. The role of Cleopatra has a lot of costumes and headpieces. One day, I needed her to come in for a fitting for her headdresses. And they were basically the bases which all the feathers, gold leaf, and beads would be applied. When she arrived for a fitting, I went into another room to get the headpieces. When I returned, she was standing there stark naked. I said, Roxanne, this is just for headdresses. Oh, do you want me to get dressed, she said. Well, whatever you want, I replied. Thankfully, she got dressed. This was uncomfortable, but I thought it was a one-off. But during the dress rehearsals, I realized that she had a major exhibitionist tendency. One of her gowns was designed in such a way that it draped over her breast to make it look like there was nothing underneath. However, there was an invisible panel that came around and hooked, covering her bust. On the night of first dress, she entered. Her left breast was fully exposed. I had explained to the wardrobe person how to hook the panel and said that she had to make sure that it was hooked. The director, also her husband, came running over to me furious. I said, something must have happened. I explained to him what precautions had been taken to keep it from happening. He was irritated, but he accepted my explanation. I asked the wardrobe person, what went wrong? She swore the panel had been hooked. Well, we both double-checked it. Everything seemed to be working. Next night, Cleopatra enters. Breast exposed. Before the director could get to me, I ran backstage to find out what happened. The wardrobe person told me that she had hooked the panel, but saw Roxana unhook it as she went to go on stage. Oh boy. I knew the director would be furious, and I had to tell him that his wife was basically flashing the audience. I returned to the seat, and the director, as expected, came rushing over to me. As he got to me, I sucked up all my courage and said, don't blame me, talk to your wife. Wardrobe saw her unhook it. He turned, stormed backstage. There was never a bare breast on stage again. But I would have loved to be a fly on that wall for that conversation. 2 years later, the same director had become the artistic director at the Tennessee Williams Fine Arts Center in Key West, Florida. And while I was still a grad student, he hired me to design The Tempest, The Little Foxes, and Hay Fever for their inaugural season. I must have done something like for Antony and Cleopatra. And, as a bonus, while I was there, I actually got to meet Tennessee Williams. I was doing a production of Death Trap at a summer stock in New Hampshire. All of the actors had been brought in from New York, so I was working with professionals. There's a scene in the play where the leading man appears to garrote his partner to death in front of his wife in an attempt to make her have a heart attack. And the scene is pretty gruesome. There's blood coming from the actor's mouth as he's being brutally choked. The scene ends blackout. Next scene starts a couple hours later after the body has supposedly been buried. The wife is in hysteria. After the first dress rehearsal, the woman playing the wife, Bob Thibault Hayes. Don't you love that name? I don't remember anybody else in the entire cast, but I remember Bob Thibault Hayes. Anyway, she comes up to me and asks if I could have a wardrobe person waiting off stage for her after the choking scene with a lip gloss so she could freshen up. I'm thinking, really? I said, Bob, you have just seen your husband choke a man to death. Do you really think you're going to run off and freshen your lipstick? She thought for a moment and said, I hadn't really thought about that. You're probably right. There was no lip gloss. Many years later, I designed 10 productions for the Theater for Young Audiences series at Drury Lane South in Chicago. These shows were all written and directed by Mark Robin, who I worked with professionally more than any other person, and is largely responsible for my professional career. One of the great things about doing the TYA shows was that all of the best performers in Chicago did them. The shows were scheduled in the late morning, early afternoon, so it wouldn't conflict with their night gigs. And since these were all fairy tales, the costumes were really wild. Numerous evil queens. We got princesses. A turtle. A cricket. A dragon. A butterfly. Even a tap dancing magic mirror. Probably the wildest was Alice in Wonderland. Queen of Hearts, Mad Hatter, White Rabbit, Dormouse, March Hare, and all the others. There are two moments from that show which really stuck for me. The first was with the caterpillar. She was someone I knew well and we could joke around easily. She was also a very well-endowed woman with a 38 double G bra size. The costume was a large tubular thing with small feet running down the front. When the actress came out for the first time, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "This is the first time I've looked down and not been able to see my tits." She turned around, walked on stage, did the scene, had everybody laughing hysterically. The caterpillar and the Cheshire Cat also played Tweedledum and Tweedledee. These ladies are two of the biggest names in Chicago musical theater world, and I had them wearing electric orange overalls, purple print shirts, royal blue wigs, sailor hats with propellers. They entered from opposite sides of the stage, took one look at each other, and could not stop laughing. Each time they would try to start the scene, one of them would break up, and we would wait for them to get it together to continue. And as they were laughing, it got everybody else laughing. Finally, we had to take a break so we could all pull ourselves together. It's these type of moments that stand out for me most when I think about my time in theater. One last story. I was asked to design the clothes for a production of It Had to Be You at Little Theater on the Square in Sullivan, Illinois. It was a two-person show, and the stars were Cindy Williams and Eddie Mecca, Shirley and Carmine from Laverne and Shirley. Obviously, this was a marketing ploy to reunite the two TV lovers who were well past their sitcom prime. When Cindy first entered the theater, she walked around the house, went up on stage, looked around and asked, are these flies going to be here while I'm performing? Oh boy. During the show, her character had to offer the other character a muffin. Well, Cindy thought about what type of muffin her character would have. She decided it should be an organic zucchini muffin. It was early November in central Illinois. No one had a zucchini, let alone in muffin form, organic or not. Prof searched high and low with no luck. Now mind you, Cindy never ate the muffin. It was on a plate and she offered it to someone else. But she insisted it had to be organic and it had to be zucchini. At some point, Prof just gave up and found some other muffin that represented a zucchini one, got other muffins in a box labeled organic, put the mystery muffins in the organic box, problem was solved. Not people. During dress rehearsal, Cindy was having trouble getting her shoes on and asked if we had a shoehorn, but all they had were the small metal kind. Those would not do. Cindy insisted that the rehearsal be stopped until we located a long-handled shoehorn. Guess who that task fell to? As you might guess from the name of the theater, it's located on a small town square. There are shops and businesses around the square. So there I was, frantically running around from shop to shop, the ones that I thought might have a shoehorn. No luck. I decided to go to the local pharmacist, who I knew and was also a sponsor of the theater. I explained my problem and he went back and returned with a long-handled shoehorn. Will this work? Thank you, I said, and ran back to the theater, where everyone had been waiting. Cindy now had her long-handled shoehorn and the rehearsal could continue. You might think that I absolutely hated her, but you'd be wrong. When Cindy was outside of the theater, she was a joy to be with. We went to the local bar several times, and she would tell stories about working on American Graffiti with a young Harrison Ford and Francis Ford Coppola, her time on Laverne and Shirley. It was great. But get her in a theater and watch out. One night, we were out, people kept coming up to her, asking for her autograph. I finally asked her, so, what's it like to be an American icon? She responded in the best diva voice that she could muster. It's such hard work, dear, such terribly hard work. That's the way I'll always remember her. People frequently ask, what's your favorite show? Well, that's an impossible question to answer. For one thing, it's always changing. What was my favorite show at one point might not be 10 years later. What I can tell you is what shows I'm proud of. Because you can be proud of something for a variety of reasons. There doesn't have to be just one. Now, obviously, the one that comes to mind immediately is Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, Porchlight Theater, which is the show for which I won the Jeffrey Award. I would have to say Mamma Mia at Maine State Music Theater, because I was the first person to design it after the professional show and tour ended, which gave me free rein to completely reimagine it. Also, Sophisticated Ladies at the Fulton Theater in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I had previously designed it at Drury Lane South in 1996 with Mark Rodwell directing. 23 years later, he asked me to do it with him again at the Fulton with a much larger budget. He also asked the same two leading ladies to reprise their roles. They were also the ones that played Tweedledum and Tweedledee. To be able to revisit a show and do what you had originally imagined and couldn't afford is a rare treat. Made all the better by working with people you dearly love. Here at RU, there really are so many productions I'm proud of. But the one that stands out in my mind the most is Antigone, directed by Deborah Monfort. Everyone knows me for my Victorian gowns in 1920s fashion, which is what I usually get hired for professionally. But Antigone gave me a chance to do something totally different. I asked Deborah if we could do a post-apocalyptic version. I thought it fit perfectly with the situation in the story. Thankfully, she agreed. I think the work I did on that show is some of my best. It forced me out of my comfort zone, and for the first time in quite a while, I had to think about the designs. The actors totally bought into the idea, and I think it paid off in spades. Also, how many times do you get to take a blowtorch to a costume? I may not be able to pick my favorite show, but I can share with you. Oh no, but I can share with you my favorite picture, which I can't. So I'll just skip over this. The most memorable moment in my career at the university came not from travel or the theater, but when I was serving the chair of the Forum Committee. After the events of 9/11, the committee thought that the focus of this series for the following year should be on the positive sides of Islam. We wanted to have a major speaker to open the series, so I started looking at various brochures from the speakers' agencies to see who was available. Fareed Zakaria, the CNN anchor, popped up, as well as another name that was not so familiar, Benazir Bhutto. I remember having read a Vanity Fair article from May of 1986 about a woman who had been elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. This intrigued me. How could a woman be elected Prime Minister of an Islamic country, yet we hadn't had a female president? The woman in the article was Benazir Bhutto. My first thought that her fee would be well out of our range, but I thought I should at least check it out. Fareed Zakaria's fee was $40,000. That was our budget for the entire year. Benazir Bhutto was $12,000 plus expenses. It seemed like this might be doable. Other members of the committee dismissed the idea, saying she would never come to such a small venue as Rockford College. I was determined to make this happen. Who better than a Western-educated former prime minister of an Islamic country to speak about how Islam and the West can coexist? Well, we secured her as a speaker, but that would be the easy part. Her speech was scheduled a little over 1 year after 9/11, so security would be a major issue, not just because she was a former head of state, but she was also Islamic. I asked the agency who represented her if there were any security riders on her contract. I was stunned when he said there were not. I contacted the Rockford Police Department and explained what would be happening and asked how they wanted to deal with it. I was put in touch with the chief of police. He said that they would provide a security detail the entire time she was in Rockford, as well as a car that could be secured at all times. The day came, and I was to meet her at the airport and travel with her to her hotel. The police picked me up at school since we had to be in the secured car. The chief of police himself was in the car, along with the driver. While we were traveling to the Rockford Airport, where her private plane was scheduled to land, the chief received a call that her plane had arrived a half hour early and that she was already there. I thought, this is not a good first impression. When we arrived, I walked to the waiting area near her arrival gate. She must have been told we arrived as she was walking toward us. This moment will remain with me forever. I saw a woman in a tan black pantsuit, loose fitting, carrying her own luggage, moving toward me. She could have been anyone. At any airport, there was no indication that she was a former head of state. As we met, she said, "Hello, you must be Jeff Hendry. I'm Benazir Bhutto. Pleased to meet you." What surprised me was that it was so normal. I didn't know what to expect. Not that. On the way to the hotel, we discussed the logistics of the rest of the day, and she apologized for being early. That is one thing I remember about her. She went out of her way to make everyone feel at ease. We arrived at her hotel and got her checked in. The rooms on either side of her had been cleared, and one was occupied by a police detail. She had about 4 hours to relax until she was due back on campus, so the police brought me back here so I could check on things. I went to Burpee, and a reporter came up to me and asked, "You know when he's going to get here?" Jerk. He must have thought former prime minister, must be a guy, can't tell anything from the name. He couldn't even be bothered to read the press packet. "She'll be here at 5, I replied. At 4:15, the police returned, and we went to the hotel to get her. We found her in a room with the policeman, munching on sandwiches. Just so normal. We returned to the college, press conference, thankfully no stupid questions, dinner. She talked with the president's wife about raising their kid, parent talk. Normal again. After dinner, the police car drove us to the loading dock of Maddox. We went in, and there were police everywhere. The ones from the hotel had come out, and I would say there were a dozen or so. Maddox was standing room only, and there was a live audio-video feed to the dance studio. I went over what would happen. I would go on and introduce her. She would enter, the national anthems of each country would be played, I would leave, and then she would speak. The moment came. The former prime minister and I were standing backstage. Even now, that seems so surreal to say. I told her it was time, and she put on her headscarf. The only other time that I'd seen her wear it was for the press conference, which struck me as odd at the time. She must have noticed my confused expression and said, "I only wear it for public appearances. It's important that people see me as an Islamic woman." I took a deep breath and went on stage. When I turned to watch her at the end of my introduction, the woman that entered was not the woman that I had been chatting with backstage. I don't know how to describe her. She had become a prime minister. She was no longer normal. She was the former leader of a country. There was magnetism and charisma coming from inside. You could see why so many people would stand behind her and believe in her vision. The anthems played. I left the stage, and she started to speak. Most of her speeches blur in my mind. I was so relieved that everything had gone so well. But there was one thing that stuck. She had been exiled from Pakistan when a hardline regime took power and was now living in Dubai. She said that one day she would return to Pakistan, and when she did, like a father, she would probably be assassinated. She finished her speech, left the stage, where I was waiting, and we walked toward the hallway. One of the policemen came up and asked if they could get a picture. She guided us into the costume shop, where all the policemen were gathered. They took a group shot with her in the center and all the policemen beaming around. It was obvious that her charisma had affected them too. She walked through the scene shop, got in the police car, and took to the airport. We had pulled it off. In spite of all the naysayers, we had done it. I was elated. 4.5 years later, she returned to Pakistan and was assassinated on December 27th, 2007. I don't think it was a coincidence that was the one line that I clearly remembered from her speech. As I was preparing for this, looking back, I realized what an amazing life and career I had. I've had a chance to do things and work with people I would never dreamed of 41 years ago. Many times. As the events were actually happening, I never realized how special they were or how much they'd mean to me later. So, what to make of all of this? I guess preconceptions are frequently wrong. Things are always going to change, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the worse. Around my house and see all of the things that we brought home from our trips. It's not the things that are important, but the memories they bring back. Those experiences are what make up your life. So, have as many